Welcome into the Rock Talk studio. Are you looking for that next great rock and roll book or documentary to check out? Because this is the podcast that reviews, previews, and most importantly, recommends to you the good stuff. I'm your host, Big Rick. Let's plug in and see what I got for you this week. Reading Patti Smith's writing is like entering a giant daydream. You get immersed in her rituals. She's very detailed about her comings and goings, and you can't help but get drawn into her world. It's a magical place about art and music and poets and book and observances of tiny things. And as the book came to an end, her new memoir, Bread of Angels, I didn't want to leave her world. It's a fascinating place to get lost. These days, Patti Smith is all in on both music and writing, and honestly, it's tough to say which one she's better at. At 78 years old, she's still thriving in both, and this new memoir, Bread of Angels, expands on the personal history she began writing about in 2010 when her book came out called Just Kids. That was the first book I read of hers, and that's when I completely fell down the Patti Smith rabbit hole. You know, after following her music career and seeing her live and really enjoying her and being a fan, I was looking forward to reading Just Kids when it came out, and it was a tremendous book. I don't know if you've read it. It's about her time when she first moved to New York City and met Robert Mapplethorpe. He was an artist, a photographer, and those two were just like soulmates, and they formed this great bond and grew up together and conquered New York together. And that book, Just Kids, tells the tale of their incredible relationship right up until, unfortunately, Mapplethorpe's death. And this new memoir also touches on Robert's death, not as near as in-depth as Just Kids, but when Robert was dying, he asked Patti to write their story. And this book talks about how she carried around the pages of that story that she was writing for years. She would carry a little suitcase around with her all the time. And it was cool to see the progression of how Just Kids came together. This book is kind of a prelude and a follow-up to Just Kids. And it also incorporates a little bit of the story that you get in her 2015 book called M Train. That's another really, really cool Patti Smith book. But this book starts with a very detailed description of her growing up, pretty close to the first 70, 80 pages. And then when she moves to New York City, she kind of puts the story in fourth gear, and you really get kind of an overview, kind of a whirlwind telling of how things all got started for her there. And I think the top-down look at this, because it's been covered in detail in other books, was the reason it felt in a lot of ways like a review. The cool thing about the way Smith writes is even in a condensed version of her talking about major chapters in her life, it's still very engaging. And it's still filled with great poetry and vivid telling of the scene, especially when she gets inside what it took to write and record her first album, Horses. Definitely a highlight here. And then after Horses, her rock and roll career kind of took off. And this is one of the highlights of the book. Why, after a few years of touring and growing pretty famous, did she suddenly stop? You know, Patti Smith helped write punk's origin story. And then she kind of switched lanes and fell into a little pop stardom with Because the Night. And then after a show in 1978 for about 1,000 Italian fans, and she talks about this in the book, she was talking with William Burroughs, and she decided it was time to step away from the public's eye. So why did she step away? Well, the book looks at that. Patti moved to Michigan to be with her new boyfriend, Fred Sonic Smith of the MC5, and unfortunately, her time with Smith was cut short due to his death. Sudden death at around 48 years old, and there's a fair amount of pages dedicated to her mourning of Smith in this book, and it's just really beautiful the way she speaks of her relationship and her longing to be with him again. Even though it's been many years since he passed, she just has a beauty in her writing that I really enjoy. Patti Smith is a traveler and a wanderer and an inspector of the past. She likes to pontificate a lot about where she is in her life and the meaning of these places she travels to, be it a poet's gravesite or a old library, an old church. She's fascinated by the history and things and how it relates to herself. And a lot of the book is her expanding on her travels, whether it be physically or in her mind and her imagination. She is constantly quoting and referencing other books because that's who she is and that's where she lives. She lives in that world. I do think I need to mention that this isn't a typical rock and roll book. It does include rock and roll moments, but they are kind of few and far between when stacked up against all the other pages of her personal history and her ruminations. So I don't want to confuse anybody and let them think that this is about Patti Smith telling really cool rock and roll tales. It's definitely not that type of book. Bread of Angels is probably Smith's most personal book so far. With this one, you get a little more intimate coverage of her marriage, her childhood, motherhood, and her life beyond fame. And though she still reaches into familiar storylines, there are a couple of revelations in this book. There's a big one in here. I'm not going to spoil it, but that really expands the story, and that kind of separates this book from the other ones. Patti Smith is such an interesting artist and such a unique, talented writer that this new memoir, Bread of Angels, really delivers another enjoyable book. So is this book in the Rock Talk Studio Holiday Shopping Guide? Did you get the Holiday Shopping Guide? It came out today. For those of you who didn't or want more info on that, let me run it down for you coming up next. All right, the Holiday Shopping Guide is something I put together for those looking for tips and suggestions for gifts for those rock and roll fans out there. What do rock and roll fans want most for the holidays? A rock and roll book. So what I did was put together a bunch of titles that you can just skim through and a little mini review about each one to give you an idea of what you're getting into. There's a section on coffee table style books, the great Iron Maiden Infinite Dreams book, Oasis books in there. There's a Queen coffee table style book. Then there's a section on oral histories, a great oral history about jam bands in the 90s. There's a great one about Lollapalooza in there. There's a section about memoirs. Of course, big year for memoirs. Cameron Crowe, Mike Campbell, Peter Wolf, this Patti Smith book. There's a section on other titles like Buzz Me In, that great book about inside the Record Plant Studios. So if you want to get this holiday shopping guide, it's free and it's easy to get. All you got to do is just subscribe to my newsletter. There's a little link in the show notes. Just click it. It'll take you right there. Again, it's free, and that will give you access to the holiday shopping guide and my newsletter, which comes out once a month. And I put the newsletter together to give you all the information, kind of a expanded version of the Rock Talk Studio podcast. So all the information you need to know about the world of rock and roll, books and documentaries in there, listing out all the new releases, all the dates that are out so far about what's coming out. I do a power ranking of the top 5 books and docs throughout the year, so it's a quick reference for if you're looking for something to check out. Go ahead and subscribe to the newsletter and also pick up the holiday shopping guide for all your lovers of that art form known as rock and roll. All right, before I wrap up this show, I've got to tell you about next week, because next week's show is the biggest show I do all year. It's the most popular one over the last couple of years. I've been doing this show for 3 years, and that is where I give out the Rock Talk Studio Awards. So the awards for the best book, the awards for the best documentary, best book about a band, best documentary about a band member, best book not about a band or band member. So there's a lot of really cool year-end awards. If you want the best of the best, the tippity top, this is it. Next week's show, I'll see you then. Tuning in, everybody. Love talking rock and roll with you. Grab that holiday shopping guide. I guarantee there's going to be some really cool recommendations for great holiday gifts. And then tune in next week for the Rock Talk Studio Awards show. All right, let's tear it down, pack it up, and head on down the road. I'll see you next time in the Rock Talk Studio.